During today's session, we're going to be hearing from Nikki Baldwin and Becca Steinhoff, along with a few early childhood educators across the state who have been working on some transition practices. And so we're very excited to hear from them. Nikki will first introduce us to the Wyoming's new early learning standards. And after this presentation, we'll take a short break and then return with the presentation by Becca and Nikki, and then along with the early childhood folks. And they will use a roadmap showing our journey for Wyoming kindergarten transition. And again, they've invited some early childhood people to share their examples of their successes for kindergarten transition. So I'm very excited to hear all about it. And so now it is my honor to turn the time over to Dr. Nikki Baldwin.
Thank you, Dina. Welcome, everybody. It's a Friday morning. I'm so glad so many of you are on here. It's great to see so many names and faces that I recognize. And old friends that I haven't seen in years. That just made my day today. And great to see so many of you on. I can't wait to talk to you today about something that is really dear to my heart, which is the process that we've just spent about the last 8 months doing to create the new early learning standards. And I don't know, I feel really filled up by this many people in this space that want to talk about early childhood in Wyoming. That's an incredible victory. And so thank you for being on that team and for recognizing how important early childhood education is. I'm going to share my screen, and I just want to invite you also, please go ahead and type any questions that you have in the chat. Dina said she'll help me keep an eye on the chat, and we can, you don't have to wait and save questions to the end. You can type questions in anytime. And I am going to ask you to use the chat to respond to a few things. So if you can get those fingers ready to be responding in the chat too, to some questions that I'm going to ask as we go, that would be great. We definitely want to hear from all of you. Okay, let me share. Okay, can everybody see this okay? All right. I'm going to hide your faces. So Dina, just unmute or whatever and holler at me if we need to answer some questions. So I'm so excited today to introduce you to Wyoming's new early learning standards, birth through kindergarten. And just a little bit about me, an introduction about me. I'm at the University of Wyoming. I'm on the early childhood faculty here, and I have been for 13 years now. Before that, I was teaching out in the state. I've taught kindergarten, I've taught preschool, I've done birth to 5, early intervention services and special education services. I've done home visiting. I've been in Head Start. I was a Head Start curriculum coordinator. I've been a pedagogical leader at the University of Wyoming Early Care and Education Center. So I've spent most of my career now, more than 20 years of my career in early childhood specifically. And I think it's my experience that crossover between special education, general education, and then that kindergarten crossover between preschool and kindergarten has really helped shape my philosophy and the things that I think are priorities that are really important for kids and families in the state. And then in my time at the university, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time thinking about kindergarten and that transition to kindergarten, as well as I do currently direct the early childhood special education endorsement program at the university. And so my time is spent in the evenings teaching classes to students who are out there providing early childhood special education services around the state, which has been really incredible experience. Just a couple other things. A few years back, the University of Wyoming received some funding from the Daniels Fund to create the Trustees Education Initiative in the College of Education. And as a result of that initiative, there was funding put in place to create the Wyoming Early Childhood Outreach Network, which is the logo that you see down there below. And I moved over from primarily teaching and administrative responsibilities at the Early Care and Education Center to direct the Wyoming Early Childhood Outreach Network at that time. And so that has been an incredible gift because I've been able to reconnect with people out in the state. And then in addition, something else that is just worth noting, as a result of that opportunity, the Early Childhood Outreach Network has been able to partner with Department of Family Services, Y Quality Counts, Wyoming Kids First, and Align, the nonprofit organizations, to create something called the Wyoming Early Childhood Professional Learning Collaborative. Maybe you've heard of that. It's a lot of words. It's the WYEC PLC. And I also lead that network of facilitators that's out in the state, providing free professional learning opportunities to early childhood educators everywhere. So there's so many exciting things happening, and I feel really lucky to be able to be a part of all of them. But one of them, the things that I'm most excited about right now, is this piece of work, the early learning standards that I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of history. So what you see, that is a photo of the cover for Wyoming's Coherent Path to Quality. And it's really important to talk about this first. So, and where all of this is coming from, I think it's so important for all of you to know where this work is coming from, what's driving it, and what's funding it, and what that means, because it really has implications for what we can expect to come next for all of you. So in 2020, Wyoming received funding from the Federal Preschool Development Grant, what was called an initial grant. They reached out to us to apply, and that was to do a lot of things. And you'll see what the main priorities of that grant were. We spent that year, 2020, there were a lot of things happening in 2020, as you remember. And one of them was in the midst of a pandemic, we accomplished these things. We completed a statewide needs assessment of early childhood in the state. We created a statewide strategic plan. And then we had these three other priorities that the federal government allowed us to work on as part of that grant. And one was to increase parental knowledge and choice. Another was to share best practices among early childhood education providers. And the other was to support improvements to program quality. I was lucky enough to participate in those bottom two bullets, primarily sharing best practices among early childhood education providers. And we've had the opportunity to develop a resource portal, a website, wyecplc.org, that has resources for early childhood educators in the state. It's still a work in progress. We have lots of things we're adding to it ongoing, but that was something that was really great to be able to work on. And then under the heading of supporting improvements to program quality, what we decided to do was address a huge gap in our state, which is that in Wyoming, up until that point, we had never had any kind of statement about what quality early childhood programs look like. And there had been maybe some attempts to try to talk about that and address it. And it just never really took hold in our state. And we had this incredible opportunity to try to do that for the first time. And so we did some really great work with a national organization called Leading for Children, who came in and helped support us in developing out our first ever statement of quality. I hope that you all have seen it. It was released last January, and it's out there, and we would love to get a copy in your hands. It's important for several reasons, but it represents in large part a shift in focus for how we want to interact and provide resources to early childhood educators in our state. And so one of the things, I don't know if you all know what a QRIS is, but a lot of states receive federal funding years ago to create quality rating and improvement systems, is what they're called, which are these statewide systems that had great intention to be able to elevate the quality of early childhood education in their states. Wyoming did not apply for those funds and did not develop that. And I think it's pretty safe to say Wyoming probably will never have a quality rating and improvement system. I mean, I guess maybe I should never say never, but I think it's likely that it won't happen here. But the interesting thing is that we have had the opportunity to see the results of that in other states and to learn from their experiences. And one of the things that we've learned since that time, I believe it was 2008 when those fundings were first released. One thing that we've learned is that really complex systems created to support quality in states across the country have not actually improved quality in any measurable, significant way in early childhood programs. And we've been able to look really closely at the data from that and ask questions about why, because it's money that's well intended to try to help improve the experiences of all young children. Why hasn't it made a difference? And what the evidence has been showing, here's some examples of the evidence about what maybe hasn't been working in some states and why. And one of those is that teachers are the center of this discussion about quality. Teachers in classrooms, teachers in home childcare programs with children, educators that are working with kids every day, day in and day out, are the key to quality. And that means that we need to invest in teachers if we want to improve quality. And that means that one of the things that we know that teachers can be given a dump of resources and materials and ideas to do, but if they can't have help connecting that to their practice, early childhood education, you all know this, you're so busy. There's so much going on that just a dump of resources doesn't really help change anything. What we need is tools to connect all those resources directly to practice. Another thing that we've learned is that change in practice or quality occurs with long-term support that is based on individuals' strengths and not weaknesses. And it needs to be supported with collaboration. So if we really want to improve quality across our state and in all settings, we know that we have to invest in long-term strength-based support and collaboration. And that's actually why the Wyoming Early Childhood Professional Learning Collaborative was created, was to try to fill that gap and to try to provide that for teachers across the state. And then another piece that's really important that the evidence has shown is that teachers' voices and experiences have to be centered, or we are just not going to have an impact. So knowing all of those things, that this is what we need to do, when we had the opportunity to create a statement about quality, we wanted to make sure that we kept those things in our minds and hearts and that we did it right. And so in the creation of Wyoming's Coherent Path to Quality, it's centered on educators and educator voices. And there's some people on this call today who had the opportunity to participate in the process of developing that document. But what you need to know for this purpose to talk about standards is that it was created by Wyoming teachers for Wyoming teachers, full of Wyoming examples, specific classroom examples. And its intent was to be holdable, as we like to say, for anyone in the state who's working with young children to be able to use that document and be able to see themselves in it and recognize the things they're already doing for kids, recognize the things they're doing well, and be able to get some ideas of things that they might want to improve in their teaching. So a quality statement is about the environments and the learning situations that we put children in. So you can think of it, it's a document for educators about what we want to create for children. And what we know, it's evidence-based. So what we know is there are 3 key things that connect to quality. Without them, quality doesn't happen. With them, we can make big impact in the quality of learning experiences for children. So relationships and interactions always come first. What I have here is just a little snapshot of what that document looks like, just so that you could see the way that it's formatted. And you can see that there's things called simple rules in that document, which are just ideas that anybody, a family member, any educator anywhere could just read and say, yeah, I know what that is and I know how to do that. The emotional and physical environment is second, the environments that we create there, and then the kinds of learning experiences that we provide for children, those really impact quality. So we created this document, we've released the document, and we're trying to provide long-term support for educators around the state to be able to put it to use in their practice with kids every day. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what came next. So as a result of all of that work with the needs assessment, Wyoming created a statewide strategic plan, and it has a set of goals in that plan. And here are some goals that are really important that relate to why we developed an updated standards document. You can see they're in different categories, but you can just know that these focus on how we can provide resources to educators to increase quality. So that first goal, I've just put in bold some things that apply to this new document, and that is to create a shared understanding of transitions across early childhood education and birth through 5 settings, and just be able to elevate our understanding about transitions. And Becca and I and some friends from around the state are going to talk about that more with you all later. You should know that transitions were actually at the center of our work on this document as well. The second goal as well, goal 3C, to ensure that all children and families are supported through transitions. And how do standards help us do that? We will talk about that. Then another goal that came from the strategic plan is that we want to make sure that quality early childhood education programming is continuous and consistent across the state. we don't want everything to be the same and identical across the state, but we want consistency for our children so that we can know that an 18-month-old in Gillette or in Evanston or in Laramie can have a consistent quality experience, no matter where they are in the state. And that we want to make sure that we can have a shared vision and really clearly articulated strategies to get there for everybody. And the standards are another tool to help us do that. And then the final goal to just talk about is that we really want to make sure that we have supports and tools for all early childhood educators that can help them do this work. So the Coherent Path to Quality is one tool that we have created to offer early childhood educators to give them the support that they need, along with long-term support from the Professional Learning Collaborative for them to learn and grow in their practice. And we are doing the same thing. We have had the same approach with developing these standards. So in response to this statewide strategic plan, Wyoming we decided to apply for additional grant funding from the federal government for the preschool development grant. And we did receive that funding. It was called a renewal grant. And as part of that, in response to those goals, we knew that we needed to update Wyoming's early learning standards. I'm super happy to show you the cover of the new standards document. It's currently still in design. So I have bits and pieces of a roughly designed product that will hopefully be finished in the next few days, maybe. But I wanted to share with you the vision and the mission of this standards work, because I think it's really important for us to understand where we were trying to go and why. So the vision for developing the early learning standards was that all Wyoming early childhood educators know the early learning standards, understand their importance, and use them daily to create high quality educational experiences for Wyoming's children. And that the mission of the work was to create a Wyoming early learning standards document that communicates the value of early childhood standards, embraces a strong image of teachers, and empowers educators to incorporate standards in their practice. I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute and just because I would like to see all of you and maybe have a little bit of a discussion in the chat about standards. So we'll slow down. That was a lot of me talking today. I apologize. There's going to be a lot of me talking today, but I just wanted to be able to have a chance to sort of process and think. We're talking about this shift to a teacher-focused resource development from our state for early childhood educators. We tried to do that with the Coherent Path to Quality. We definitely tried to do that with the standards, and you'll learn more about it. I just want you to think about your practice for a minute, and where have standards fit for you? And I think it's great to ask yourself, have you viewed early learning standards as a tool, as a resource, as something that you've used in the past every day? Have there been some hurdles or challenges to using standards in your teaching every day with children? So just take a minute and process that. And I just want to share a story from my experience. In 2016, I had the chance to do a sabbatical. I had the chance to travel internationally for that sabbatical, but before I left, I was able to spend a couple of months traveling around the state, talking to early childhood educators about the Wyoming Early Learning Guidelines and Foundations, which are our current early childhood standards. So I hit the road and did a lot of interviews with early childhood educators and brought along the Early Learning Guidelines and Foundations with me to talk to them about those. And I think by the time I was done, I had spoken to about 30 and had done in-depth interviews with 30 early childhood educators from around the state. Lots were family home child care providers. Many were in center-based child care programs. And I had the opportunity also to speak with teachers in Head Starts and child development centers. And one of the things that I learned that was hard to hear was that most everybody didn't know we had the early learning guidelines and foundations, number one. And second, that the people that did know we had them said something like, oh yeah, I think I got that book for free. It's over on my shelf. And some of them, if we were lucky, could point to the place on the shelf where they sat. The thing that was incredible though, was there were several educators that did say, oh, I have those and I use them all the time. They were able to get out a messy book that was wrinkled and pages were bent, and they were able to say that they used it. And the energy from those teachers that were able to put that into use was noticeably different. And it really made me think a lot about what we want for our educators, how we can link them to something so that this beautiful document, those documents were fantastic. This beautiful document doesn't just collect dust on somebody's shelf, but it actually does something for practice. And I've never been able to get that out of my head since that experience, that there's a gap between all the hard work we're doing to try to create resources and then what teachers do with that in practice. And I guess I wanted to ask you that question as you're thinking about this. Have you seen the gap? Have you experienced the gap between standards and your practice? And if you could just type in the chat some thoughts about that. Have you seen the gap? Have you experienced it? Or have you been able to use standards and it's been a big success for you to help impact your teaching? Just any thoughts about that would be great. I'll give you guys some time to think it over and put that in the chat. Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, thanks. Natalie talks about living in the gap. Yep, I think that's where a lot of people live. You know, they're there. You want to use them. We just don't know exactly how, right? I think that's the experience of some. Yeah. Thanks, Karen. There's definitely that gap exists in other fields as well. Yep. Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how do we use them for planning? That's part of where the gap is, right? We have these standards, but how can they help me plan what I do with kids every day? Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Stephanie's talked about how her program embraced those. And I do think, Stephanie, the way you talked about that is something I have heard from programs that have embraced them. My programs that I directed as well, it was work to do it, but they felt invested and it was worthwhile to do the work to be able to put those into use. Yeah, thanks. Emily uses them to write preschool learning goals. That's fantastic. Kira, I really like what you have to say here as well. There's such differences in kids developmentally that it's really hard. You're going to apply them differently every year. Yeah, thanks, Shar. Talked about planning around the standards or planning around kids' experiences and bringing in standards after. And then I guess I'd just like to ask a larger question to the group, which is why do we have standards? Why do we have early learning standards? If anyone can drop some wisdom in the chat about that, that would be great. Thanks, Liz. Talks about, yeah, we knew where they were, but sometimes you lose track of them. Why do we have standards? This is a question, trust me, that we've been grappling with for 8 months. Thanks, Susie. Paula talks about consistency. Susie talks about awareness to help guide instruction and learning. Mindy. Right, to support children's learning and development. To hold us accountable. I really like that, Sarah. Thanks for saying that. And Cindy as well, we want to know where we want kids to be. That's really important. We have to have some goals that lie ahead for kids. And then also, how do we make that happen? How can we hold ourselves accountable to that? Yeah, I like Liz talks about that. That's how we can have a share. We can create a shared vision. And Kayla points out that it's really important as we're thinking about kindergarten success. Thanks, Faye. I might be missing some. Roadmap for school prep, for intentional program improvement. I like that. And as a tool we can use to communicate as a team. Thank you, Karen. Thanks, and Carrie too. It can guide our lesson planning and give us a place to start. That's good. So, I mean, I think I think people here can see the value of standards, and we also see that we kind of live in the gap. And there's no perfect way to address the gap. Thanks, Kelsey. But we're trying really hard to do that. So, just historically, just so you know a little bit about this, it was back in 2001 that Wyoming was one of the very first states, the Wyoming Department of Education decided to adopt preschool standards. So we were one of the very first states to have any standards for kids below kindergarten. And that was a big deal. And they were called standards at the time. And those existed until 2013, 2015, when the Governor's Council, the Governor's Early Childhood State Advisory Council, did a revision of those standards. And at that point, the really cool thing, if we're thinking about in our understanding of early childhood, we moved from just preschool standards to this really important acknowledgement that we have to start thinking about kids at birth. And so Wyoming led the way again with making sure that we were addressing that birth to three gap as well. And so they created two sets of standards, one for kids 3 to 5 and one for kids birth to 3. In acknowledgement of what all the research was showing us. And that was really, really powerful that Wyoming took that step. A lot of other really important things exist in those two documents. But here we are now in 2022, and there's more that we know. And we've learned a lot from those lessons. And so here we are with a different set of understandings and new challenges that we need to address. So I'm going to share my screen again. And we'll come back to this. That led us to this. So I hope that you can see that the vision and mission are intended to address that gap that we talked about. This is how we engaged in this process. So the University of Wyoming Early Childhood Outreach Network that I direct was tasked with leading this process this time around. And one of the things that we knew we wanted to do is to we had a lot of things we needed to accomplish. One was, you'll see represented on the left-hand side, the evaluation team. We know that what we needed to do is take a look at our early learning guidelines and foundations as our starting point, and then look at the new updated standards that were out there nationally, really important national standards, particularly the Head Start Early Learning Outcomes Framework and some other things, and that we needed to use those to try to respond and update our standards. We also, though, knew that we wanted to do more than just come up with a standards tool. We wanted to do something else. So we created a development team that their work was going to be to design a document around that. And we'll talk more about it. And then we're concluding with what we're calling a review team, which is those really important key stakeholders in the state. So we started this process back in end of April, May, and we're finishing up right now as I speak to you all. The review team is getting ready to meet as soon as we have the final design of the document here in the next week. So just so that you all know, this wasn't just a few people sitting in a room having conversations about what we should do for standards. This process was really well thought out, and with the intent of centering teacher voices and bringing in people with expertise needed at these different levels of design and development so that we could have this document. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of those. The standards update was conducted by that first initial team, the evaluation team, which was a team of 6 people. And if you want to know more, there's a link in a slide. There's a website that documents everything about this process. All the team members, all their background, that will be represented in the document itself as well. But you can find out a lot more information about this there. But for our purposes here, just so you understand the process that we underwent. The evaluation team was people with curriculum expertise, in particular, and who've had other experiences with standards, use them, and with standards tools in use. And that was intentionally a small team because all the work that team did was collaborative. There were no separate subcommittees under that. It was a single team. And that the first task was to review the ELGs and ELFs. There they are. Those are existing standards. It's important to just throw out there that another thing that happened around that window of time that they were developed is there was a real pushback against the term standards in early childhood for lots of justified reasons. Some of it was the academic push down that early childhood educators were facing. And because the word standards at that time, it was kind of vague about what it meant, but it felt like academic pressure was just embodied in that word. Pushing back against that, Wyoming resisted using the word standards, as did many other states at that time, and talked about using words instead like guidelines and foundations. One of the things that's been an interesting result of that, however, is that many people don't think of standards when they look at those. They don't think that's what they are. And there's been a misunderstanding across our state for a long time that people have believed we don't have early childhood standards anymore. The reason we've reintroduced standards language is specifically because of that. What we've decided to do is own what standards mean for early childhood and decide for ourselves that definition and how we want to communicate that to others. So to clarify, to help make this document something that's translatable across all stakeholders, we've decided to embrace that language again. And we're going to they are standards. We're going to call them standards. We're going to own it, and we're going to define what that means. Okay, so anyway, we did an initial review of the ELGs and ELFs, took a look at the strengths of both of those documents. And then we compared those against updated national standards since that 2013, 2015 time. There's a new Head Start Early Learning Outcomes Framework. We looked at it and compared it against that, and then the Common Core state standards as well. What we also did was we did a search for new and innovative state standards examples across the country initially. And these 3 states we looked at for sure. We looked at California because they included kindergarten in their standards. We looked at Oregon and New York because they were brand new to see what they were up to, and saw some really interesting differences across states, what they're doing. An example in New York is a document that is the most in-depth thing I've ever seen. And their response to trying to support teachers was to give the most details you could give, and you create a very, very large document. Oregon's was a different kind of approach, different kind of language, and more open and flexible and really interesting. We ended up really focusing on the New York and Oregon sort of examples to see how we wanted to respond to that, because they were kind of representative of 2 different directions that we could go in Wyoming, and we looked closely at those. We also did an overview of comparator state standards, spent some time looking at the states around us in the Mountain West, and looked for standards that felt resonant to us, and ended up spending a good chunk of time with the Montana standards, actually, as a tool that we were looking at as we were developing our update. And then we also did a survey of ages included in state standards from across the country. Definitely one of the things that the research has shown is that it's important to understand that early childhood goes through age 8. And when we have early learning standards that don't include school age, that's a problem. So for our purposes, we looked really closely at what states are doing. Some states are doing birth through 8 standards. Many states are still doing just birth to kindergarten, and many states have embraced standards that include kindergarten. And that's what we decided to do as well. And then the standards update, once it was complete by the evaluation team, those updated standards were sent to the development team for their approval. So there are some key decisions that we made in this process, and there are reasons behind all of them. I've talked about them a little bit. We decided that building upon what Wyoming did with the early learning guidelines and foundations, knowing that we have to start talking about learning from birth. One of the things we decided at this point is that we needed a tool that crossed all those ages in a single place. So it was fantastic to include birth through 3. And one of the things that we found in use of the early learning guidelines and foundations is that there's not a clear division line developmentally that's age linked. And this is what the research has shown across the country. There's there's not a sudden gap at age 3 where suddenly kids all are doing the same thing and are meeting now 3-year-old standards. What we know is that development doesn't go by age. Roughly, there's some ideas of things we can know, but you can have 2-year-olds that have very distinct skill sets, and they're both really still developmentally appropriate. So the problem with 2 sets of standards and leaving out kindergarten standards is that things are really disjointed. And so what we knew is we wanted to make the effort, and it was not an easy effort, to write standards from birth all the way through the kindergarten year in a single document so that we could support that transition through kindergarten. It didn't seem at the time, and I still believe this is true, that it was going to be the best use of our effort to continue on past kindergarten at this point. But someday a dream of mine will be that we're able to do that with another standards update. Another decision that the team made that was very intentional was, and we'll talk about what the implications of this is, to define the standards through benchmarks, but not include individual indicators. And there's reasons why, and we'll talk about that more, but primarily it's so that teachers can put them to use more easily, so that it appears less like a checklist kind of document and can be more flexibly used to meet the needs of all kids and teachers in all settings. And then the big decision for us was that in looking at standards documents across the country and trying to figure out how to fill that gap, we really wanted to create a practice-focused document that surrounded the standards. Standards are about children's development. And so this was something we really grappled with. The document we want to get in the hands of teachers, though, we want it to be full of those tools that can help them fill the gap and actually know what to do with those standards. So that was our mission. And here is a little snippet of what the standards look like. If you want to see the actual standards, birth through kindergarten, you can go to this website. You can click on that link and it's there. And that's a thing that can be seen right now. It's not as pretty as this on that website, but they exist. So that's birth through kindergarten. And we'll spend some more time looking at what those mean. That standards, like a single page of the standards themselves, standards, domains, subdomains, standards, benchmarks, was what the development team used to engage in their process. And I want to just take you through the development team process. I will take you now to that website so that you can have a look. And you can see on the top right, if you want to see the draft of the standards, it exists there. I can just click on it for you. It exists here. You can download the PDF and look at it right now. But I want to get back to the development team. The development team was made up of 24 early childhood educators from around the state. So these were individuals who are teachers in classrooms, family home childcare providers, curriculum coordinators, Head Start teachers, Child Development Center, special education teachers, family service providers, interventionists, kindergarten teachers, this is key, and school district administrators. So knowing that we wanted to create a document through kindergarten, we wanted to make sure we included kindergarten teachers on this committee, and we did do that. You can see that we met over a series of 8 meetings. And I just want to walk you through what it is that this team did. Initially, and you can read all of this in detail, the team spent a lot of time trying to establish a shared vision and a set of understandings and shared knowledge. And that's something that we really learned in our work on the Coherent Path to Quality, is how important it is to create a learning network. They call it a quality learning network at Leading for Children. As we learn together, then we can develop things together that are really powerful. So in our initial meetings, we were focused on learning. One thing that you'll see here that was really important to us is that we address equity in this document. And that meant we needed to try to define what equity is. And we needed to spend some time looking deeply at tools that respond to equity. And we decided to, we studied the NAOIC equity statement. You'll see that. It's down here somewhere. All right. I don't know. Sorry about that. Now I'm giving you all a headache. The statement on equity, and we decided that these 3 learning principles and tools really help define what we want for equity in our state. So universal design for learning is a way to design classrooms that includes all children from diverse learning needs and backgrounds and experiences and languages and cultures. Trauma-informed practices. I am certainly hopeful that you've been spending time learning from our friends, we call them the Julies, yesterday and in other settings to help us know how we can support children who've experienced trauma. And the truth is that if you've been listening at all, you know that trauma-informed practices are just good teaching. They're good for all children all the time. And then developmentally appropriate practice. So these are key documents. And what happened, what we did is we divided into teams to develop out their expertise in these areas. And then those teams presented back to each other what they'd learned so that we could feel like our collective group of 24 had strengthened our depth of knowledge in all of these areas so that we could make sure that this knowledge was embedded as we developed out the standards tool around it. We did presentations, we did a lot of learning, and we talked about commonalities between those 3 tools and distinctions between them. And that was really important for us so that we could see how these can be applied across all settings and using our new standards. They did presentations to each other, you can see there. And then we started talking about what needs to be in this standards tool, the tool that's going to surround that standards poster that you saw there. What do we want in there to fill the gap for teachers? We had a lot of discussion about that. And one of the things that was really powerful about the development team is it wasn't just the individuals in that team. They represented a collective group in their local communities from across the state and in their programs, their diversity of programs. So their task was to go back to their people between meetings to get feedback. So we had a lot of conversations where they would return, they would get information for us, they would bring back questions, they would bring back ideas to the whole collective development team group, and then we would move on from there so that this wasn't just 24 people's ideas, this is 24 people and then their connections and network across the state. So I think we did some math at the beginning. It was hundreds and hundreds of people that we had access to just through these 24 individuals on this team. We did spend some time also with trying to understand how we can link the coherent path to quality to this new tool. And of course, that advancing equity statement. I finally found it. That's what I was looking for earlier. Then the evaluation team ongoing was meeting in between these meetings to try to respond to what was coming from the development team, came up with some ideas about elements that we thought we wanted in the document, and then got their feedback. And then you can see here, then at this point in the middle of by about meeting 5, we convened to a different set of subcommittees that we called practice-based teams. And they were tasked with developing out content for the document, some practice-based tools for interpreting and understanding the standards, and then evidence-based rationale. And then we did a lot of work in those teams. And finally presented a final draft outline of what we thought we might want this document to be, and got feedback from the team. The development team was key. They were everything in this process. So it's been truly inspirational to have worked with that group of people, because this document, we can honestly say that this document was created by Wyoming early childhood educators who are knowledgeable and have expertise in those things that are most important that we know we need to be focusing on. So I can't say enough about that team. There's some members of that team on this call here, and maybe we'll have some time at the end for them to be able to talk about the experience. This is what we arrived at. In the document surrounding those standards, we have included these elements. Stories from Wyoming was the most important piece. So we wanted stories specifically about what's happening in practice where teachers are filling the gap. We wanted it to be full of those examples so that teachers can see themselves in this document. So every page in the subdomain area is full of stories from Wyoming. We also wanted to make sure that in everything we did, we linked it back to that equity piece, that developmentally appropriate practice, universal design for learning, and trauma-informed practice. And then we also, because we made the decision to not at the minutest indicator level, give teachers those indicators, we wanted to help develop a tool so that teachers could identify when kids are meeting a standard and what that looks like when they're proficient. And I'll show you examples of all of these. We also decided to embed teacher tips, ideas that are just good practice for teachers in those pages. And then offered links directly to Wyoming's Coherent Path to Quality with page links and everything, so that these two documents can be companion documents that are used together. We also decided to embed QR codes with links to additional resources rather than creating an enormous document that has all the resources in one place. We recognize that teachers are active learners and that they're totally capable of clicking on a new link and finding more information there. So this document didn't have to hold everything we know about early childhood. There's incredible resources out there that have been developed by others, and we just are linking to those things throughout the document. Let's talk about the stories from Wyoming that we collected. Those stories were collected and the collection of those was done by the development team. They went back to their networks and they asked people for stories of standards at use in their settings. And they had a specific charge to identify those for each subdomain, to find stories that are about infants and about kindergartners, so that we could have representation from birth through kindergarten across all developmental ages. And then across all settings, we were definitely looking for examples from, and we have examples from these: Head Start, home visiting, IFSP services, religious-based preschool, family home childcare, center-based childcare, just parents and children at home or in the community. And so we were looking for that wide range of stories to represent that these standards can be used in all of these places. And we received them. I'm happy to report that we have an incredible resource full of stories of Wyoming teachers and Wyoming kids with the photos of the actual kids and actual teachers and using standards every day. And here's an example of one that I have a few examples that I'll just show you. There's a lot of text here. My expectation is that you have to stop and read any of this right now, but here's an example of a preschool teacher who's using daily journals to help support her children's emerging writing skills. And it goes into detail about what that teacher does and did with those journals, and about Dylan right there and what he was doing in his journal that day. And then what that has to do with standards, we make that link for teachers in the document. One other example, I have a couple other examples. This is another really short, simple story about a teacher. I think teachers can see themselves in this document. This is with a 27-month-old, and you can see an infant right there behind him, and just using straws and containers, and how standards are something that's being met in that activity and something that can be used to plan that activity. One other example from family home childcare setting was an experiment done with 3 different kids at 3 different ages. And a lot of information is in this one. This is a longer example of that provider's thinking as she was planning this, and the why behind what she was doing and how she linked that to standards. So these are 3 of many. I haven't counted the total. Lauren might be able to tell me. There's so many examples from classrooms and programs around the state in this document. And then I'm going to go back to our story about Dylan and the daily journals to point out the next connection that we make. So for each story that's shared, we make an equity connection, and it looks something like this. So we just draw out how different principles of equity can be found in that story. Teachers can see themselves in this. So in this example about Dylan, where we point out how principles of universal design for learning are embedded in everything that Linnell, his teacher, decided to do with those kids with journals. So it's just a direct link to this is what it looks like in a classroom, and this is how she's using universal design for learning, and she might not even know it. And so we're teaching what the principles of universal design for learning are, and we're using it in an example from Wyoming. You do the same thing. That example about straws and containers, we decided to point out how what the teacher did there was embracing tons of principles of trauma-informed practice. So we talk through what those are and how that can be seen. And the truth is that in every story, you can see all of these, but we decided to emphasize certain aspects as a way to just help teachers see that this is doable to fill in that gap. One other example, back to that example about the volcanoes, that was a fantastic example of developmentally appropriate practice as 3 different kids at different ages engaged in this. So we just point out what it is that was happening that was developmentally appropriate in that example. Then our other tool that we wanted to, that I think is important to talk to you all about was examples of proficiency. So when you look at the standards themselves, it doesn't give you a checklist of indicators. In fact, in the early learning foundations, for instance, they're very indicator heavy. There's a lot of examples in there of exactly what it might look like for a kid. And that was well intended and done by a lot of states at the time, because we're just trying to give more information to teachers. But what we found is in use, it actually sometimes made it harder for teachers, because if a child wasn't doing that exact skill that was listed there, they often thought they weren't meeting the standard. And so to address that, we've intentionally kept them more broad and provided this tool to help teachers think through how any child can be meeting a standard. And so it's just thinking about different levels of proficiency with which children can be working on all standards. Emergence is the first level. And emergence is something that we see in infants and toddlers often, kids with disabilities sometimes, other ages as well, depending on the standard. But emergence is just the skills that are precursor skills, or skills that are going to be really essential before a kid really acquires that skill. I'm going to show you some examples of what emergence looks like. Acquisition, that one's a little bit simpler to see. They've acquired it, right? It's the ability to demonstrate a skill or knowledge. But there's a lot more after that as well. So that doesn't mean you're done with a standard if a child is able to demonstrate it once in some setting. Generalization is really important to think about with standards. So we talk about, can a child demonstrate a skill or knowledge across time, places, different people, using different materials? And generalization and fluency are really important to look at here, because especially when we're talking about kindergarten, meeting these standards as well, because a standard isn't just met, as I said before, because a child did it once. Standards, children can become more fluent, meaning they demonstrate that skill more smoothly or efficiently or with increasing complexity all the time. And what this does is it broadens standards so that teachers can see every child can fit somewhere on this table. I'm going to toss out one example. The development team developed out these examples of proficiency. In fact, the examples of proficiency were in response to the development team wanting us to have tools to help teachers know how to interpret the standards. Here's an example of proficiency just tossed out there. This is not the only example. This is some set of ideas about how children could meet standard 2C, which is a math standard. Identify currency and recognize that it holds value. Now, an infant teacher might look at that and say, an infant can't identify currency and recognize that it holds value. Maybe they can't, but they can identify a favorite toy or object and recognize favorites of others. They're recognizing that an object has value. And that's emergence. That's before they have that skill. But we can see that that's emerging in even an infant who has a favorite person. They can recognize that things have value. And then when it's acquired, one example of what it could look like in acquisition is that if a child determines an item or toy's value or offers it in exchange for something else, I'll share this toy if you give me this toy, or they could be pretending to pay for something in their play. If they're doing that, they're in the acquisition stage of this. Generalization could be children identifying different types of currency, different things we use to pay for things, as a tool to acquire a desired object or to access activities, right? You need tickets to go to the game and you have to pay money to have your tickets, those kind of ideas. And then fluency could be an example of that, could be using currency correctly during their play or actually purchasing things with money. I hope that you can see here that this is one standard, birth through kindergarten. Quite frankly, it goes through higher than kindergarten here, that children can demonstrate that they are at some level of proficiency on this standard. And this tool, working from emergence through fluency, is offered in the standards as a way to trigger teachers thinking about their own kids and their own space and how they're showing them they can do these things. These are just examples placed throughout the document because we are not going to give specifics of every standard like this in the document. Those are indicators. That's what we're avoiding doing, because then teachers could think this is the only way that kids can show that they have met this standard. And this is just a set of brainstormed ideas about how children could meet the standard. just another example, and I want you guys to play along for this one. So here's an example of a snapshot of some of the standards. This is under the subdomain of social development. And what we've got, let's look at benchmark 2C. So it's under children build relationships with peers by, and 2C says using problem-solving skills to resolve conflicts with other children. And what I'd like for you to do is in the chat, I want you to try out finding an example of one of those 4 measures of proficiency. What would emergence look like on 2C? How does an infant or toddler demonstrate that they use problem-solving skills to resolve conflicts with other children? Somebody try out emergence, someone try acquisition, generalization, fluency. What would it look like for a kindergartner or a first grader to use problem-solving skills to resolve conflicts? And I want you to be brave. Type in the chat if it's one of these: emergence, acquisition, generalization, or fluency. And I'm going to give some time for this. And then type in your example of how that might be seen. Okay, nice job. Is it Tashi? You were bravest. You started. We got an acquisition in there. We have an emergence. Ah, very nice. Thank you, Brittany. An infant might notice or name that the other child is upset. Yeah, an infant or a toddler, absolutely. Perfect. Natalie's got a generalization in there for us. Using a strategy learned from school, like trade an item at home with a sibling. Very nice. Generalizing across settings. Yeah, very nice, Ruby. If you get accidentally hurt and you cry. Okay. Great, Nicole. Because Nicole has the freedom to come up with her own examples, she had one right then that came to mind about 2 children who were negotiating and did rock, paper, scissors to decide who gets to sit in a chair. Jessica talked about fluency. Child takes on the role an adult would in previous levels and works to help. Yeah, that's fluency, right? If you're stepping in to help another child, other children solve a conflict, perfect. Got another great example of emergence. Yeah, after a failed attempt at taking a toy, that's emergence still. Knowing that I want a toy and trying to take it, that's an emerging skill for being able to use those problem-solving skills. So you wait. Yeah, and notices when the child moves away from the toy or distracts the child with another toy in order to get the item. Those are really important emerging skills. See, I think this is a fun game because what this does, I hope you guys are experiencing why we did it this way. Thank you, Rachel, is that the benchmark is there, but any teacher of any age child can put it to use if we let them use their knowledge and expertise and their own examples from their own classroom to show how a child can demonstrate it. Oh, very nice, Ruby. Yeah. So that's what this is for. This document is an invitation for teachers to do this together. And that does imply some accountability, right? That means they're going to need to make an effort to make this happen for them. But that is where the gap is. This is an invitation to fill the gap for all teachers. I'm so excited about the possibilities in using this tool. We're really excited as a development team to find out how it is used and what other resources we can build around it. I'll just toss out the example. This was one that our development team also offered an example, their own examples from for 2C. You can see what yours were and what theirs were. They're not the same, but they are all examples of proficiency. This gets me really excited. I love this stuff. I could do that all day, but let's move on to another element that's there in the document. And these are teacher tips. And I just want to throw out a few of them that are there, intentionally really short, with a link to practice for teachers to try. So here's an example of a teacher tip, how to share standards with families. Just a little bit of information for a teacher to be able to look at and maybe prompt some thinking, and then some suggestions if they want to try it out. I'll give you a second to just look through that. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to move on, just share a couple of other examples of teacher tips. A teacher tip on how we can ask great questions to deepen children's learning. And then a suggestion, and you'll notice on this one, there's a QR code. This is just draft. The QR code will be explained and in a different place actually in this, but there's a link to a great article about how to ask good questions to kids. So if any teacher wants to know more, they can just scan that QR code and go to that short article from NAUIC about how to ask great questions. This teacher tip is alongside a story that's in there from Wyoming Teacher, where that's a Head Start example where a teacher asked questions to help kids solve some problems while they were playing and making a train. It's a really lovely example. And then we include this teacher tip. Another teacher tip, this is just a final one to share, but so that you can see they're about a broad range of topics. This one's about behavior, how we understand and think about behaviors. You can see that the try it idea prompts teachers to respond by trying something out in their practice. There's also a QR code to a link to another great article from NAUIC about how we can observe children's behaviors and learn from those. Teacher tips are on all the domain, subdomain pages, along with all these other things. There's another important section that's an invitation to get teachers into the standards. It's before they see the subdomains. It's just a set of ideas. There's many more than this. This is just a little snapshot from it of suggestions to how people can get to know the standards better. These are tools that are not only for, so this is if you're a family home childcare provider and you want to try to find a way to put them into your practice, here's some ideas of how you can do that. If you're an administrator in a Head Start program and you want to do some professional development with your teachers around the standards, here's ideas of ways that you could lead a professional learning activity with them. Once again, this is all about practice and getting the standards into practice, but this is just this is another set of suggestions, ideas, brainstorm. And this will be a single page that's going to be full of these ideas in the document as well. And then that's one other piece that sort of leads us to the next piece that Becca will introduce soon after the break, is talking about the transition to kindergarten. This is a snapshot. This isn't the whole section in the document, but it definitely addresses the transition to kindergarten specifically, and some guidance for programs for kindergarten teachers that will be using this document, and for their school administrators, for their principals as well. Just wanted to toss up some quotes. This document is full of quotes from early childhood educators around the state about the standards. Just wanted to toss some up there. And these photos that are in this presentation are in the document as well. They're from actual stories. This is a photo from a story that's in the document. Just let you take a look at some of these. I think some of the people that said these quotes are on this today as well. What's next right now for us is that we are in the very final stages of design. We've been responding back and forth with feedback about design. Expect something possibly by the end of today. Once that's gone through copy edits and all of those things, then that will be shared. The final design draft will be shared with the review team first. The development team will also see it as well, but the review team will look at that draft, and then we're going to convene the review team. The review team's task, I don't know if you remember back to that initial slide, review team's task is to just ensure that the way the standards have been written aligns with the strategic plan. It aligns with the coherent path to quality. It aligns with the vision of the work we've been doing as part of the preschool development grant, that it fits well with those things, and then to help us talk about how we want to disseminate this and share this with everyone in the state. Then we will create a dissemination plan. We'll print these. We're going to get this into people's hands all across the state. We're going to send it out to everyone who's working in a licensed program in the state, and to others, anyone you can think of that wants it, anyone who wants this document, they can have it in their hands. Then we're going to plan a big launch release, which will happen possibly by the end of this month, possibly at the beginning of February. It just all depends on how this timeline. We're not going to rush it. We're going to make sure it's done how we want it before it's released, but you should know that it's coming very soon. And then the thing I'm really excited to share is that we will be spending the preschool development funds for this next upcoming year, developing out additional resources linked to the standards document. So we're talking about video content and resources. We've got the development team and their network of people around the state are giving us ideas about what teachers want to help them implement the standards so that we can get these in teachers' hands and get them in practice. So this next year is going to be about developing those resources and getting those resources in the hands of teachers and administrators and everybody. One of the documents that is going to be developed from a section of the development team is a tool to share the importance of standards with school district administrators, the importance of these standards specifically for kindergarten with school district administrators and others who will want to try to understand how these, by the way, do incorporate the Common Core standards. They are found in our standards. So Common Core is addressed in these standards, and then what it is that we can do there, and just sort of the rationale that you all know about why playful learning is important. All of that's going to be in a subsequent little supporting document that we're going to be developing out. We started developing out already, and then all these other resources for teachers are coming. So that was a lot. I'm just thrilled. I have to tell you honestly, it's really, really important to me personally and to the people that developed this document that people in the state know what happened and know why we did what we did. And now I can say that 120 people know what happened, and I'm thrilled. And I would love it if you shared it with others. This wasn't just a group of 3 people sitting in a room trying to come up with something. This was your peers from around the state creating a tool intended to fill the gap. We have a few more minutes if anyone has questions or comments. There's some people here who participated in the process. Feel free to unmute. I may call some of you out to share what your experience was like, or any questions that anyone has. Okay, I'm going to start calling people out. I'm going to start with you, Lauren. Lauren's been a part of the process all along. Is there anything you'd want to say to this group about standards that I haven't said?
Something that you haven't said, I highly doubt, but I'll just reiterate maybe. I think something that really kept us grounded throughout the whole process was truly trying to create a tool that teachers would use. I think we've all just seen guidelines and foundations set on a lot of shelves, and even people that were using them, we really wanted to get them something that was more usable and more friendly. And we hope that we've done that, but that was something that kept us grounded, was educators at the heart of everything that we were doing. And I also am really excited about the addition of the, instead of the indicators, using those measures of proficiency. I think it's really going to change the way we talk about children, because I think right now it's really easy to shift into language about talking what kids sometimes can't do. We're not seeing that standard yet, or we're not seeing them demonstrate that. But shifting to this measures of proficiency is going to change the way we're talking about children in a strengths-based way, and saying we are seeing them do it. It looks like this right now. And so I think it will change the way we view children and the way we talk about them, and hopefully will leave teachers feeling empowered to do their job.
Thanks, Lauren. Sorry, Kelsey, but I see your face right now. So Kelsey was on the development team. Would you like to chime in with anything that stands out to you about the process?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate how it's a tool for the teachers. I think that was definitely one of the most exciting parts for me in working with everybody. It was a great experience to hear everyone's strengths and views and see it come all together. Was super exciting. It's definitely a tool that I was in the classroom and I definitely use standards to guide my teaching. And it made me miss being in the classroom so much, where when we were talking about, and at the end of it, all I wanted to do was get back in the classroom and use it. That's how excited I was about it. And it definitely made my heart miss being there. So it's definitely going to be a tool that I can see to be very beneficial and actually being used over and over again. So it is that worn out copy that is just scribbled on and used, and they need another copy. So I think that's really exciting. The other super exciting part was the equity pieces coming into play. That is a big push that I've always had for my education as well as my teaching, and to see all those pieces embedded in it, and to see that in full force represented and have those conversations is, I think, going to be huge for our population of Wyoming. So
Thanks, Kelsey. Any other thoughts from anyone out there or questions? Appreciate your comments in the chat. Stephanie, you want to offer anything? Stephanie was on the development.
Gosh, I mean, I turned my camera back on and you picked that out right away.
Yep.
You know, I think just playing off of what Kelsey shared, the idea that this really is a tool. There are other resources that we have included that have been embedded. You know, those QR codes to be able to open up other resources. So I think it really is a learning tool, and I can't wait to see it, you know, in use in programs around our state.
Thanks, Steph. I just really encourage you to, I'll put in the chat right now, if you want to know more while we're waiting, or we're anxiously waiting for this document, I'm going to put the link to the whole story of the standards and in the chat again, so that you can just pull it up if you want to see. And you can look at the actual updated standards piece, just not the surrounding document for teachers. So feel free to go there and check it out and share it. You will get, when this is disseminated, everyone will receive a copy with a card that describes what this is, and you will have a lot of resources communicated to you about how to get this in the hands of everyone. We're filming a promotional video for it this coming week that will be in a program with a director, with a program education coordinator, and with a teacher in the program talking about these standards and with kids. So that will be shared on social media and other platforms, and that's coming soon. So you can look for all of that as well. Thanks for listening, everybody. That's the most I've ever talked in a presentation. So phew. I can't wait to get it in your hands. I can't wait to share it with everyone. So, and thanks, Dina.
Thank you, Nikki. It is evident, I think we all feel and see your passion, and as well as all of your team. And so I, for one, am very excited to get my hands on this and dig in deeper as well. So looking forward to that. And thank you to all of you who were behind the scenes as well as even up front and putting all of this together. You can tell that it's high quality and a lot of thought went into that. So